Okay, well, I've given you an introduction to the course, A History of World Civilizations 1, and now I want to think about those words. As I mentioned in that introductory video, it's a history of the world, not the history. That's because there are many different ways to tell a story. And that's this jumping point to the next word I want to talk about, and that's the word history. This word history is kind of an interesting word. It comes to the English language from the Greek language. The Greek word is historia. You see the word historia twice there, the Greek word historia. You see it first in Latin letters, Latin characters, in the Latin alphabet that we use in English. And you see it also in Greek characters, the Greek alphabet, which is used in the Greek language. That Greek word historia means a story. That's what the word history means, story. In fact, if you look at the word history, you see the word story right in there. This comes as a surprise to some of my students who've had pretty sucky high school history teachers who thought the word history came from a Greek word that meant memorize list of presidents in order, or something like that. Well, of course you have to learn things, all right? But if you're not learning things in the context of a story, then you're not learning history. You're learning trivia facts, okay? Because history is about story, it's about narrative, it's about characters, it's about people. People who do things. It's about action and plot and drama and all that kind of thing. And if you're not getting that story and you're just learning facts, then you're doing something besides history. But that Greek word historia means a particular type of story. Not just story, it means a particular type of story. It means a story that's written down. It's not a word that refers to stories that you might tell around the campfire, or that you might share around the dinner table, or that grandparents might tell their grandchildren about the good old days, or that you might hang out with your friends and tell stories about the gods. That's a different type of story than what this Greek word historia refers to. The Greek word for that type of story, the type of story you tell with your mouth, is muthos. And when we hear the English word mouth and the Greek word muthos, yes, those words are connected through what are called the Indo-European languages, and you'll be learning about that. And that's in fact where we get the word myth, okay? Mythos is the type of story that you tell with your mouth. But historia, now back to this word, historia, is a story that's written down. And so when we talk about a history of world civilizations, we're talking about, although we'll spend one period looking at the prehistoric period, focusing on the written story, the story that's been written down. I also teach a course in mythology where we deal with stories that change, but history is a story that's written down, so writing is going to be important to us. A history of world civilizations. This is from the CF College Catalog, a survey of the past emphasizing intellectual, cultural, military, political, and economic history. As I mentioned in that introductory video, we'll be focused on intellectual and cultural history. History of Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Rome, medieval Christendom, Islam, Africa, and the Far East. And the world's even bigger than that. We'll be talking about Central Asia, South Asia, Mesoamerica, and other places too. Obviously, we have to pick and choose. The history of the world, a history of the world, has a lot to pull from, right? There's a lot of choices out there. We'll be focusing on the parts of the story that have most affected your life, but that doesn't mean we ignore everything else in the world either. So this is a very broad course, all right? And finally, civilization. And this is probably the most important thing I'm going to tell you in this brief video. This word civilization is a word we use in conversation to mean all kinds of different things. You know, we might use the word civilization to mean, and to refer to people where they have good laws. Okay, they're civilized people; they have good laws. Or we might say that a civilized place is where you have electricity. You might go camping, and when you get back home and turn on the air conditioner, you say, "Well, I'm glad I'm back in civilization." Okay. Or you might think of a civilization as a place where you have, you know, Walmarts and McDonald's and that kind of thing. We use the word civilization very loosely. But in the study of history, we use the word civilization with a very specific meaning. I've drawn this definition from Wikipedia. That's what the definition was a few minutes ago anyway. You know how Wikipedia works. But it's a pretty standard definition. A civilization is any complex society, okay? So it's a complex society. It's not like a family. And don't tell your parents I'm teaching you that your family isn't civilized, okay? We're talking about the very specific use of the word in the study of history. So it's a complex society characterized by urban development. That means when people live in cities, or at least where the city is important to them, as an economic center, military center, judicial center, religious center, where the city is important to them. They may live outside the city on a farm, but the city is important to them. Social stratification. That means where there are recognized differences between people, okay, based on perhaps wealth or power, all kinds of things. A form of government, okay, so we have to have a government. And symbolic systems of communication such as writing. The two big ones here are living in cities and writing. Social stratification is important in the study of civilization. And, well, there may be a group of people living on an island somewhere where everybody gets treated equally. Certainly isn't very common. And so we're never going to find a place, in this course at least, where there isn't social stratification. A form of government, that's also fairly common. We're not going to study anything in this course where there isn't a form of government. And so the big two for us to keep in mind here are urban development, living in cities, or at least where the city is important, and developing a written language. It's going to be a very important concept for us, certainly in the very early part of this course. There's also the number 1. The college catalog doesn't define when the time period ends, so we're just going to keep marching through until we get to the end of the semester. That number 1 really doesn't tell you very much at all. But in the next video, we'll be starting talking about things, and we'll be looking at the prehistoric period.